Let's take a look at a real PSA question stem. I want you to be familiar with the kinds of words that the LSAT writers like to use. Now, I think probably the word that draws most people's attention is this word principle. And it's a good indicator when you see this word principle that you're looking at a PSA question, even though, and here's the weird part, even though strictly speaking, this word principle is not necessary. Like, what I mean is, let's say you swap out this word principle for which one of the following statements, some bland claim, right? Some bland word rather, statement. Which one of the following statements, if valid, would most help to justify sociologist's argument? This would change absolutely nothing about the metric on which we're going to evaluate the answers, meaning the correct answer is still going to be correct, the wrong answers are still going to be wrong. And there's proof that this word principle isn't necessary. Okay, so really what makes a PSA question in the STEM are these four words. These are the four words that most clearly indicate that we're in PSA territory. Because, I mean, you can tell that this is a kind of strengthening like we talked about. Most helps to justify the argument. Obviously, this is not neutral. It's not weakening. It's to strengthen the argument. But it's also asking us to strengthen in a really specific way. It's like, not quite justify, but just pulled back a little bit. Most helps to justify. Okay, so that's how we know it's a PSA question. Let's take a look at the argument. Now, the stimulus, you'll notice, is rather short. I mean, it's not long, but that doesn't mean it's simple. This is actually quite complex. There's a lot of nesting going on. As soon as you start reading, you'll realize, yeah, there's some nesting going on. We have a sociologist making her argument, but look, the first thing she says is some other people, romantics, right? Which romantics? The ones who claim, what do they claim? That people are not born evil, but may be made evil by the imperfect institutions that they form. These romantics, the romantics who make such a claim, these romantics cannot be right. Why? Right? Why? For they misunderstand the causal relationship between people and their institutions. So already this is really convoluted grammatically. Right? Grammatically, you have the use of the word for. Remember from the core curriculum lessons, for, since, because always introduces a premise, right, which supports a conclusion up here. And what is the conclusion? Well, the conclusion, and this is again a recurring theme, something cookie cutter on the LSAT, it's referential phrasing. Romantics cannot be right. Okay, what do you mean romantics cannot be right? We need to flesh out this referent, right? So to do that, you can look to the contents of their claims. Like what are they claiming that our sociologists saying? Oh, you're wrong in making this claim. But you also need to look to the argument. Okay, you also need to look at the argument because all of it is important. All of it is, it's all contextualized in this, in this neat little package, right? Because, well, look, the romantics make two claims. Claim one is that people are not born evil. And here's claim two, they may be made evil by the imperfect institutions that they form. So here's claim one, claim two. People aren't born evil. What does that mean? They're born neutral or good, right? That's what it means to not be born evil. Okay, they're neutral or good. Claim two is that they may be made evil, turned to the dark side by what? The imperfect institutions that they, referring to what? People, right? That people form. So people form institutions. Again, what institutions are we talking about? Schools? Government? Corporations? Unfortunately for us, we're just not told. It's just this abstract idea of an institution. Okay, fine. So knowing that these are the two claims that the romantics are making, and our sociologists saying, no, you're wrong to the romantics, it's got to be at least one of these claims is false, or maybe even both of these claims are false, right? Which claim is our sociologist disagreeing with? Well, let's take a look at her premises, right? Her premises to try to support her conclusion that the romantics are wrong. Her premises start with they referring to the romantics. Right, referential phrase. The romantics misunderstand the causal relationship between people and their institutions. Okay, now which of these two claims do you think this premise is trying to fight against? Right, the romantics, you misunderstand the causal relationship between people and their institutions. Well, there's a causal claim right here, that institutions make people evil. That's a causal claim, right? So it seems like we're attacking the second claim here. By we, I mean the sociologist is attacking the romantic second claim. After all, okay, that's another premise indicator. right? Institutions are merely collections of people. Okay, so let's try to map this out if we can. Starting with our premises, we have P1, right? P1 over here, P2. P1 is the idea that romantics are confused about the causal relationship between institutions and people. In that, romantics think that institutions have a causal influence on people, right? People are made evil by the institutions. Here, a little c, or I'll just write cause. Our first premise is that, well, look, you're just confused about that, meaning whatever the real relationship is, it's not this. Okay, so P2 says, look, institutions are merely collections of people. When the author here, the sociologist, uses the word merely, she means institutions are nothing more than. Right? What is an institution? What is a corporation? A corporation is just a collection of people. See, that feels kind of wrong, right? Obviously, corporations have hard and soft assets. They have other things. So I feel like this kind of gives me a clue about what she means by institutions. Remember earlier I mentioned that they don't really say what they mean by institutions. So maybe it's not corporation. That's not the institution they're talking about. Maybe it's something else, right? Some other institution which could be fairly said to be merely collections of people, just collections of people. So what is an institution? Institution is just what you call a collection of people. So each little dot is supposed to represent a person, right? And you put all the dots together and you refer to that dot as some institution, just a collection of people. Great. Premise 1, premise 2. Now, the conclusion. Now, remember, the conclusion is the negation of these claims. And like we're trying to figure out, is it like negating both claims or is it just one claim, right? When you say you can't be right, the sociologist made a conjunctive claim, A and B. No, you're wrong. Well, no, you're wrong could be just not A or just not B or not A and not B, right? That's De Morgan's law. So here, I was trying to get you to think like, do we have a clue about which of those? Is it just not one? Is it just not two? Is it not one and not two? And the clue is, it sounds to me like it's not two. And because, right, I take that view because of the premises that are present. The premises that are present, it doesn't seem like the sociologists want to comment on whether people are innately evil or neutral or good. Right? Because, if you look at these two premises, do these premises reveal anything about what the sociologist thinks in terms of whether people are born evil or no, right? That's why I feel like she wants to attack this claim. She wants to say that, well, look, it's not the institutions that make people evil. That hence she mentions that you misunderstand the causal relationship. And this, a little bit more confusingly, but it's like, I'm not quite sure why this has anything to do with it yet. But maybe we'll find out in the answers, right? But for now, I'm going to say the conclusion is just, it's not that institutions cause people to be evil, right? This arrow, again, is a causal arrow. So the first answer I want to look at is answer choice E. It is because it's the right answer. If you experience this question anything like the way I experienced the first time around, I went through all the answers and I eliminated E, because it just wasn't obvious to me how E even connected to the argument. And for good reason, right? Because if you just read the words here, the whole does not determine properties of the things that compose it, it's so abstract, right? It doesn't use any of the words. I don't see romantics, I don't see institutions, I don't see people, I don't see evil. I just see some abstract referential phrases, right? And that's the key. It is such a recurring theme on the LSAT that the LSAT writers for right answer choices have to be subtle about it. They have to hide the right answer choices, whereas the wrong answer choices are more willing to use the words that, we'll go through the other answer choices and you'll see, but they more willingly use the words that you find present in the stimulus, right? So let's think about how this answer choice works, why this fits as in what ways this answer choice exemplifies what all PSA questions have in common. First of all, how is it even relevant? The whole does not determine the properties of the things that compose it, referring to the whole. So I'm going to replace that, right? The referential phrase. So the whole does not determine the properties of the things that compose the whole. Now, if you're able to do this task of pointing the referential phrase and like accurately hooking it back onto the thing that they're talking about, you're going to have a lot easier time seeing how this answer choice works. So here's how we do this. Think about the relationship here between whole and part, right? The properties of the things that compose the whole. So you're talking about whole and part. Is there any part to whole relationship that we encountered in here, right? Could it be anything that's part whole? Could it be like, is romantics like the part to the institution, which is, no, that doesn't make sense. Romantics are the one that's talking. Okay, could institutions be the part that where the whole is the people? Could that be it, right? People is the whole. People are composed of what? No, that doesn't make any sense at all. Okay, what if it's the other way around? Could it be that people, they are the parts and the whole is the institution? That might work, right? And in fact, that kind of fits with what the sociologist is saying when she says institutions are merely collections of people. This picture right here. The institution is the whole and people are the parts. That might work. Let's try that. Okay, so in place of whole, we're going to write institutions. And in place of, so here's another whole, we're going to write institution. And in place of things, we're going to write people, right? Because that's the part. Okay, so the institution does not determine the properties of the people that compose the institution. Yeah, that's starting to connect, right? And you see how if in the premise we're establishing that people and institution have this part to whole relationship, and E additionally gives us this idea that, for things that have part to whole relationships, the whole doesn't determine the property of the parts, right? The institution doesn't determine the property of the people. Then you see this conclusion follows more strongly. The only thing left we have to fill in is the properties. What properties of the people are we talking about in this argument? The property of being evil. That's the property, right? So, of course, this is broader. E gives us a broader principle than we need, but surely it works, right? It does not determine the evilness of the people that compose it. Now you see with answer choice E, this argument is really, really good. You take E, you shove it over here, you call it P3, right? Look, P2 says institution and people have this whole to part relationship. P3 says when you have a part to whole relationship, the properties of the part isn't determined by the whole. Well then, okay, just follow that through. That means it's not true that institutions cause people to be evil. And right there, E exemplifies what makes a PSA question both similar to a strengthening question and different from a strengthening question. Now, I've mentioned before that PSA questions is a subset of strengthening. For PSA questions, you're making the argument stronger. Therefore, in that sense, it's a strengthening question. And generally, you make arguments stronger by taking existing premises and making them more relevant to the conclusion, right? And you see that happens as well with answer choice E. It interacts with P2, it plays with P2, and jointly they make the conclusion stronger. That's the part where it's similar to strengthening. Now, here's where it's different. The way that PSA answer choices do this interaction effect is largely structural. Okay, I know it's going to be hard to digest what that means, structural, but I promise, like, you do more of these PSA, we're going to do more of these PSA questions, we're going to do more essay, sufficient assumption questions. You're going to see really what I mean when I say it's structural. If you'll bear with me, here's an analogy. It's like you take this puzzle piece, you fit it into this thing over here, and it somehow like triggers this thing to spit out this conclusion, right? Like this algorithm says, the whole doesn't determine the properties of the things that compose it. Okay, well, you can use this algorithm and talk about a lot of different things. You don't have to talk about institutions and people and, whether it's evil, but you can, right? You can take this. You're like, all right, let me take this algorithm. Let me spit in the inputs for what's the whole, what's the parts, and what's the property, right? The whole is going to be institution, the part's going to be people, and the property is going to be evil. And this algorithm just spits out, okay, if the whole is going to be institution, the part's going to be people, the property is going to be evil, and my algorithm says the whole doesn't determine the properties of the things that compose it, then the output is institutions don't cause people to be evil. Do you see what I mean? That's a sense in which it's a bit different from strengthening questions, and I think you can feel that too, right? It's these PSA questions, and even more so when we get into sufficient assumption territory, they're just much more structural. Now I want to take a look at D, which is a really attractive answer choice. It's not the right answer choice, as you already know, but it's really attractive, and I want to examine why, right? Why is it so attractive? A society's institutions are the surest gauge of that society's values. So, first of all, and this is always the default question you ask, what does this mean? Well, what it says is that a society's institutions, that's the best gauge of what the society's values are. Okay, so let's say I encounter a brand new society. No contact whatsoever, know nothing about the society, but I am curious about the society's values. Maybe I want to engage with the society. I want to, at minimum, make sure that I'm safe, right? I want to make sure one of their values is that they don't just kill people they don't know, right? Bare minimum. All right, how do I figure out if the society has that value? Well, according to D, one of the surest measures of it, one of the surest indicators of it, of that value, is to look at their institutions. I will look at their institutions in order to figure out what their values are, right? That's what the sentence is saying. It's like, you want to know how cold outside it is? Well, look at the thermometer, because the thermometer is the surest gauge of the temperature. Okay, that's what this is saying, right? That's the relationship. D is laying out a relationship between institutions and the society's values. Institutions take temperature of society's values. All right, great. Does that help me establish whether or not institutions can also be the cause of values, of society's values? Here I'm taking to be just the aggregate of what, people's values are. I don't know, right? I mean, in my thermometer analogy, no, right? We all know thermometers merely measure the temperature. Thermometers don't cause the temperature. In fact, if anything, it's the other way around, right? It's the temperature that causes the thermometer to act. But that's an analogy. Here, why can't institutions simultaneously be the best gauge of society's values and also cause society to have those values? In fact, it's precisely because they cause society's values that they're the best gauge for it. It doesn't actually take too much to kind of just conjure up what that world might look like. You have a society with very strong institutions that have institutional norms, right? We are an institution that prioritizes organization and orderliness and conscientiousness above all else. Those are our prime values, and through the existence of that strong institution with those values, it ends up filtering down to all of society. So you see, in that world that I just conjured, institutions in fact do cause society to have the values that the institutions do. And it also happens that you can look at the institutions to figure out as a gauge of what the society's values are. So you see, D, I think here is playing this trick on us where it's saying because institutions gauge society's values, that therefore it can't cause the values in those society, which that's an unwarranted, completely unwarranted assumption, right? Because the opposite assumption, as I just illustrated, is totally reasonable. And it's just an empirical question of what's what, right? So in order for D to work, like if D wanted to be the right answer choice, you have to change up this premise or this premise, right? You'd have to have a new premise, P3, for example. P3 would have to say something like, if X gauges, right? If X is a gauge of Y, then X cannot cause Y, right? Now, if we had a P3 in our original argument that says something like this, if X is a gauge of Y, then X cannot cause Y, then answer choice D would actually do quite a lot of work, right? You would take answer choice D, you plug it into this algorithm, and you have a X here is the institution, which gauges Y society's values, then the institution cannot cause the value. Then you see you get a lot closer to this conclusion, that therefore institutions can't cause people to be evil. Now, again, you have to keep in mind that there's still this assumption gap between people's values and society's values. But forget that for a second, and you still see how it's a lot better, right? It's a lot better. But I mean, unfortunately for answer choice D, neither of our premises look even remotely like the premise that we need for D to work. Okay, so no good. Answer choice C is kind of a good litmus test in how much you've been paying attention. If you have been paying attention and internalizing a lot of the recurring themes on the LSAT, there should be one thing that stands out like a sore thumb, and that's the thing that should lead you to eliminate this really quick. And it's this word, should, right? Look, this is not an argument in the prescriptive tone. It's not whether something should be this way or should be that way. It's just a matter of fact, look, they're just wrong. Okay, they're just wrong. Institutions don't cause people to be evil. Should institutions cause people to be evil or should they not? Silence. Sociologist is silent about that. Do you see what I mean? Like, as soon as you see answer choice C and says people should or should not do something, that doesn't feel right. And B says institutions formed by people are inevitably imperfect. Okay, well, that sounds an awful lot like what the Romantics were saying, made by the imperfect institutions that people form. The Romantics didn't say whether these institutions had to be imperfect. The Romantics just said, look, the institutions that people form are imperfect. And B is reinforcing that point by saying not only are they imperfect, they are inevitably, they have to be imperfect. Okay, I'm not sure whose side B is on, right? Like, are you trying to help the Romantics establish this point better or what, right? Did you forget what the question stem is trying to do? Because our sociologist is not in agreement with the Romantics. So yeah, okay, so once you account for that shift in perspective, I'm not really sure what to make of B. If B is trying to help the sociologist out, I'm not sure in what way it's trying to do that. Institutions formed by people are inevitably, they have to be imperfect. What does that mean then? Are they evil? Are they good? I can see imperfect institutions be still mostly good, not perfectly good, mostly good. I can see inevitably imperfect and be a little bit evil, right? Or even a lot evil. So I'm really not even sure what to do with that. So are these institutions which you tell me are inevitably imperfect, are they good institutions or are they bad institutions? I have no idea. And from there, I still don't know, regardless of whether they're good or bad, do they cause people to be evil or don't they cause people to be evil? Again, it's just question marks all around. And lastly, answer choice A says people acting together in institutions can do more good or evil than can people acting individually. So here, hopefully you picked up on this comparative. By now, maybe let me just assume that you understand how to break down the comparison. So I'll skip that and jump straight to what A is saying, which I think is true, right? True enough. You get a bunch of people acting together to do good. Makes sense to me that they can do more good than somebody acting by him or herself. And similarly for evil, to do great evil, it's actually kind of hard to do great evil by yourself. It's a lot easier if you band together with a bunch of people and collectively try to do evil. You guys will get a lot more done, right? Okay, so A is like, not that earth-shattering of a statement. Seems kind of obvious to say something like this. Now, again, the question is, how does this hook up to our argument? How does this help or not our argument, right? Okay, you get a bunch of people in a nonprofit, Doctors Without Borders, right? They do a lot more good than if these doctors were acting individually. Okay, so did the Doctors Without Borders, that institution, cause people to be good or bad, right? I don't know. Now let's talk about some evil institution like a drug cartel, right? Yes, a lot of gangsters acting together can do a lot more evil than if they all acted individually. Fine, okay. Now the question remains, did the institution make them evil or not? Do you see, this just merely describes the difference. It's a comparative statement at its core. It merely describes the difference. You got a bunch of people acting individually, you got a bunch of people acting together. Okay, it's the together group that can do more, cause a greater effect. It completely sidesteps the question of whether the institution is what causes them to be good or bad. I mean, if anything, it seems like A is even suggesting that just individually they can already be evil, right? So you can see how the answer to that question could fall out on the side of, how it is that like a bunch of people, when they get together and do more evil, you know how that happens is precisely because of the institutions, right? The drug cartel. They were just a little bit evil before they joined. Now that they joined, the cartel made them way more evil than they were. So completely in contradiction to this conclusion. I mean, it doesn't have to be that way, of course. But my point is just that it shouldn't be that that contradictory position is actually consistent with an interpretation of A, right? We're looking for a PSA after all.